Turk here. So we have our frame all installed. Now all we have to do is get the casing on and paint it, and we're all finished and ready to install the actual door. So the first thing I like to do is take a piece of the trim we're working with for the casing and place it on the frame right here. So what I'm looking for is I just want to check it and see how it sits. And I want to make sure I have full coverage over here. I just want to check to make sure the gap on this side here isn't too large, and that's sitting fairly well. So I shouldn't have many issues. And also that there's no gap in here. There could be a slight gap, but we could fill that with DAP or filler later. But that looks like it's sitting really nice. So now what we have to do, we have to determine what the hangover on this edge here is going to be. It could sit really close like that. You could have a bit more gap. Okay, there's a few things that'll determine how big you have to make that gap right there. One thing I like to have a look at before I start is the other doorways and the hardware in the other door frames of the rest of my house. So in this part of my house, these doors are already set, and it's about 1/4 of an inch. Now the door frame also has to be held back a certain distance to clear the door hardware. Okay, so this panel here that comes out and make sure the door shuts properly, and then also on the left side of this door is our hinge, and the hinge makes us have to have it back a certain amount. So we wouldn't want to accidentally set the top of our door a certain height and then get down the side and realize that we have to push that further left or further right to accommodate for these hinges. So we want to keep that in mind before we go and set our distance. So what I like to do is take a shim from the previous step when we were installing the frame, and I like to just take it and put it right up against the opening here, and I look to see at what point of the shim it's equal to that overhang from my casing to the opening of my door frame. And I just put a mark right where that's equal. Okay? In this case, it's right here. So then all I do is I just take a square, I square a mark across here, and I'll cut this off. And then I can use this as my shim for setting all of my door frames in the house, no matter how many I'm doing. Okay, so I got this outside and I cut it right on the mark there. So now I know that mark there is, that's the dimension that I need to set all my trim out, okay? So I like to write keep on there, okay? And that way you won't throw it away if it mixes in with all the other shims. Maybe it's a good idea to write it on both sides, okay? And I usually, if I'm wearing a pouch, I'm not right now, but usually if I'm wearing a pouch, I find a nice little spot and I keep that on me for the whole house that I'm doing. That'll keep you at the same distance all the time, okay? Okay, so now we have this. What we want to do is we're going to go around the perimeter of the jamb, and I want to put it up in the top corner here, setting it flush to the inside, and then just placing a mark on that side, okay? I like to start with the two corners. So I'll set that one up. Put it flush here. There we go, we got that corner on. And I'll do a couple marks down this side to make sure I can keep the casing straight with the frame. And I'll do this top and then down that side as well. Okay, so you can see now that I have a mark at the top corner. And I followed those all the way down the side. There's one there. Try to put them at each set of shims. Okay, that's always a good idea. And I've also gone ahead and done the same marks on the inside of the door frame. Okay, with our marks all set on the frame, I can take a piece of my casing, inspect it both ends, and see if there's any damage to either one. And when you get these at Home Depot or if they deliver them, oftentimes you'll find that maybe one end is a little messed up. You want to keep the nice end down, right? So we'll do that. So I'll have a look. These ones, so they're both, that one's pretty good. I have enough at the garage that I can inspect those two if I find one. You just want to make sure you do that. So setting this up now, I kept it up, I cut my jamb up off the ground about a 16th of an inch. And it's a good idea for me to do the same with the trim if I want to keep it up off the ground, and I can fill in that little tiny gap later with some DAP if I want to. If not, if you're on the main floor, you can keep it right tight. It's up to you, depending on what you think your trim is going to do. But I'm just going to keep this off the ground just a hair. And what I can do is, I set it up, then I can go up here to my mark at the top, and where that pencil line at the top intersects with the trim, I can just put a little mark right there. And now I know that's the inside of my 45-degree mark. So I'll have a 45-degree mark starting at that mark right there. So I got my right side marked out. Now I'll do the same thing on the left side here. Keeping it off just a tiny bit off the ground. Okay. I've got it marked out there. Now I'll take these outside and I'll cut them out at a 45-degree angle on the miter saw. Alright, so I'm outside with the miter saw. I've got a box set up on the other end to keep the trim up off the ground the appropriate height so it's not dipping down. If it wasn't there, I'll show you. This would want to lift up off the deck of the saw. We wouldn't want that. You'd be forced to push down more, and that just puts your hand more at risk of sliding or slipping into the blade. So we don't want that. You want to put it appropriate, something appropriate under there. On our job site, we always use a table saw stand. I have it. I don't have it here, so unfortunately, I'm not using it, as I mentioned in a previous video. So I'm just making do with what I can. I'm doing as safe as I can. So that's what we have to do. So what I want to do is I want to set this saw up, and I know it's a 45-degree angle, so it's a 90-degree. It's a 90-degree corner that we're trying to put trim around, so divided by 2, and that gives you 45 degrees. That's the same for anything. If you check the inside of that angle, and we know it's 90 on our door frame, then we'd be at 45 degrees for our 2 miter cuts, okay? So what I want to do is, this saw has a lockdown tab here, and what we'd like to do with that is it can lock down on any angle, this one here, okay? But underneath, there's also another button, and that button allows us to slide it along, and it'll lock into a whole bunch of different common miter degrees that we use very commonly. So 45 being the most common, I would say. I'll slide it along and it'll lock right in there. It'll lock into the tab, and then I can just push down on this, and that'll just double lock it down, okay? So now I can set up my saw, slide it just over here. Okay, so now that I have my piece ready, I know this is the mark I want to hit, and it's going to go this way. It's always a good idea to draw this angle on the piece so you don't accidentally mess it up. So what I would like to do is make sure that there's nothing inside this channel right between the fence and the deck of the saw. Okay, you don't want anything in there that would accidentally push it out. You can imagine if there was a little piece of dust or wood or something in there and I did that, it would effectively change the miter that I want to cut. So we definitely don't want that. So we'll clear that out. We can check inside here for anything. It's all clear. Okay, and I want to push this tight, making sure it stays tight to there. And again, check that whatever's holding up my piece out the end is doing so. Okay, I like to take my hand, put it right here at the end of the saw. Okay, you want to keep your hand on this side of the line. Okay, so this line indicates you shouldn't have your hand anywhere past that. If you do, then probably get somebody more experienced to cut it for you, or use a push stick. I like to hold something like that on with a push stick. So I'll take this, my mark's here. I'll slide it just to this yellow mark because I know the blade has to cut somewhere in between here, okay? Just to get it close, and I'll bring it down. I'll have a look at where that blade's gonna hit, okay? So what I'd like to do is bring it a little bit closer, slide it just a little bit over. Now, what I'll do here is I'll come down and I'll cut into it, you'll see, and then I'll slowly creep it over, and then I'll cut right down for my final pass through all the way down through. I won't cut all the way through first. I like to do a couple little cuts and slowly slide the piece over gently. And let the blade stop before I lift it up. It's always the best bet. Okay, nice clean cut. Okay, so here's my second piece. I've slid it in. Now the mark is on the opposite side of the trim for me to cut it. So that puts it to the inside here, and my 45 has to go like that, from that short side to this long side, okay? So that's very awkward. I could set it up 45 and try to look through there and set it up. I might get my head in a really dangerous location to try to get and see that mark. So the best thing to do in this situation is just to rotate the saw around. Or I could have rotated the piece itself, but I have my box set up there on the end to hold this. So now that I can see my short mark here, I'll do the same thing as before. Clean this out, check everything, okay, set it in tight, make sure I'm happy, slide it over just until it just gets close to the yellow edge here, come down with the saw, hand off the trigger, checking it, okay, I'm happy with that. That is perfect. So right here, you can see my line is right there at the short edge of that piece. That's exactly what we want. All right, so I'm back in the house. I have my two pieces of trim that I've cut, left and right side. And then I did take a second while I was out there, and I just cut a 45 on one side of the top piece that'll go across the top of the door. Okay, I cut it on this side just to make it a little easier on me so it's not hanging out into that staircase there. I could have done either one, but the intention is I cut it so I can line it up with here in a second. So I'll take my gun, okay, finish now, and I want to take a minute to open it up again and see what kind of nails I'm using. Okay, so for this trim here, I like to have two sizes that I like to use. We're close to, okay? So I'm using a 3/4 inch, and then these are a 2 inch. So the 3/4 inch nail is what I generally use on the inside of the trim right here, okay? Because you can see right there that that's a lot thinner, okay? So I don't need as much nail going through. Whereas on the outside of the casing right here, it won't be going directly into wood. It has to pass through a 1/2 inch of drywall and then it can go into wood. So I want a little extra nail to get through that 1/2 inch and grab strong into that wood. And I also know that that wood inside is 3.5 inches thick. So if I use a thick nail or a long nail like this to go through that thickness, I know it'll never go anywhere beyond and into something that I don't want it to be into. So I do know that that's fine that way. You wouldn't want to use these 2 inch nails on the inside, because what you'll run into, if you accidentally have your gun on an angle outward, it'll end up shooting the nail and it'll come right out in the inside of your door frame, and you don't want that. That would be annoying to deal with. So I'll avoid the 2 inch for now, and I'll stick with the 3/4. I'll load those into my gun. Okay, safety glasses on. What I want to do right here is I want to line this piece up with that crosshair that I did originally. Okay, just going to lift it up just until it's right on that mark. In this case, it's actually right on the mark already. And I'll put one nail to hold it. I don't want to go too crazy with it at this point, because if I do some kind of cutting error in the top or the other side, I can still fix it rather easily if I just take a second and only put a few nails in it. So what I'll do is I'll just do the top nail, and I'll do a second nail, setting it right on my mark in the middle line where I've set up those lines. Okay, with that side tacked in place, I'll just take my right side, let's tuck it out of the way for a second, taking my top piece that I pre-cut outside, and I'll set it up here just for a second. If you have another person to give you a hand, that'd be a good idea. I don't, so I'll just set that there, nice and flush. I'll put my hand across here, and I'll just put a little tick right here, right at that crosshair that we had before. I'll come back, double check, make sure it's nice and flush, and I'm happy with that. You can measure it, but I find if you go ahead and measure it, then there's a little room for error. I have a problem with being dyslexic once in a while, and I'll flip the numbers, or I'll read the tape upside down. I'm left-handed as well, so sometimes I'll bring the tape across and I'll be reading it upside down. And let's say it was 55 1/16 that I was supposed to cut. I would be looking at it upside down, so instead of going to 55 1/16, I would actually go to 54 15/16, one tick the opposite way, if that makes sense. So I find this way has worked out a lot better for me, and I've had less error just doing it this way. So that's what I like to stick to. Okay, so I took this piece outside that I just showed you and I cut the other end of it. So now I have two 45-degree angles, okay? Both the long ends are on the top. You want to make sure you do that. Make sure you cut the proper way. It can be messed up. Again, that's another good way of doing the little pencil mark way I showed you. It's kind of hard to do, mess up that way, because as I show you here, see I have the tick mark, and then I draw that little 45-degree mark so I know, okay, that's the way this 45 needs to be cut. So now that I'm inside with it, again, what I can do is I'll pop it back up in place on the left side here, make sure I'm nice and flush. And I'll come across to the right, and I'll just have a look and see how it sits on that pencil mark. Now right here, it looks pretty darn good. I am pretty happy with that. I can take my right side now, just pop that in and see how close I can get. See if it looks really good. And now it looks really, really close there. So what I'll do is I'll put my right side just sitting there. Okay. I'll grab my gun. And I'll just put the one, I'll set it up flush on the left side. Okay. Just nice and flush right there. Okay. Let's put one nail for now. Okay. I just pulled down on it a little bit. It was up a hair. So now I'll just pull my other side up here. I'll put one more nail here, keeping my fingers away obviously. And making sure my gun isn't tilting down or too far up. Make sure it goes straight in there. So now I can look right here. Now this looks pretty good still, but double check that now. If I was out a bit, I can still move it easily enough with two nails, but I am pretty good there. So what I can do now is take my right side, pop it underneath there, and it fits nicely. So I got pretty lucky on that one. Now if I was out just a fraction of a hair with either one of these, I could have potentially lifted this up just a tiny bit to make this one fit. So it would avoid me having to go out and cut it again, right? Or trim this one down. But that's up to your eye. If it looks like it's very close to the pencil, you can just adjust these two just ever so slightly, just to make it so this corner, this mitre here sits nice and tight and it's closed up, because you don't want a big ugly open in your mitre there. So that worked out nicely. So I'll put another nail in here. Okay, that's pretty good. And what I'll do now is I'll just run down, starting at the top, and I'll look at each one of my pencil marks that I did earlier with the shim, and I'll put one nail on each one. Okay. Okay, this is right in the middle. Hopefully you can see that little pencil mark there. See how the trim deflects a little bit still? So I can just set it right on that mark, right there. And continue on my way down. And here's my last one at the bottom. Just set it right on the mark, like so. Okay, so I have nails in there. And what I like to do is just go down the side of it and see where I have nails. I have another one here. And as I'm going down, if I see anywhere where it looks like there's a little bit of gap, see like right here? See that little bit of gap there? I'll put another nail right in there just to try to pull that in tight. Okay? You can always fill the nail holes in easy enough. It's harder to fill in gaps, so I'll try to pull that in tight right like that. That looks pretty snug all the way down now. So that side's finished. Now I'll just go along the top, I'll check it. I'll make sure my corner's tight here. If not, I could pull down on that. Now the nail's so thin that it'll actually be able to move a little bit if I needed it to, but it's actually pretty good. So I'll just put it in tight. I'll check the top middle here, making sure I'm on my pencil mark. Pull one there. I'll put a couple in between. Make sure it's in tight. Two there. Okay. And then I'll go down this side here on the left jamb, setting it on each mark. One other thing you can do with these small nails, and it depends on the trim you're using, or the casing. So if the casing is a little thicker, or if you're using pine, you can, sometimes people like to put a nail up through here, nailing the two corners together, running the nail in this way. I don't particularly like to do that with MDF. I find it splits, so I just stay away from that, and I just deal with it afterwards. But my trim's sitting pretty flush, so I don't feel like that's necessary in this case. Now that I have all the 3/4 inch nails in, I'm going to switch out. I'm going to switch out to the 2 inch, slide those into my gun. And just up here, I'll check this, and I'll put a couple nails. Now I want to stay a little bit of distance away from the edge corner because I don't want it to split or make a mark. So I'll stay down a little bit. I'll push a little bit of force in to make sure it's pushing that trim in. Keeping my hands back because you never know what the nail will do. I like two nails on the corners here. Okay. So I like to do that. I get the nails in the top corner, and then what I'll do is I'll go down the right side and left side jambs, and I'll put a nail every 16 to 2 feet down. Usually the ones in line with the 3/4 inch nails that I put in that go right into this jamb here. So I'll put one in parallel to that. Okay, and the good thing about that is now that effectively locks this jamb in even stronger. So now this trim on this side, and then when I put the other trim on the other side, that'll lock it in, okay? Okay, so as you can see here, I end up putting 2 nails in the top corners, both sides, just to keep that lock nice and tight. It's actually not as tight as I would like, but you'll see it once we're complete this job. You won't be able to see that gap at all. So I came across the top, same thing over here. This one's a little tighter up in the top left, a little bit open there, but we will fill that in. And then as I came down the bottom, I kind of did the same thing. I like to have an extra nail just at the bottom because when I put my baseboards in, the trim that goes at the bottom of the wall here, just in case I'm a little tight and I go to put that piece in there and it might shove this over. So I like to put the second nail in there just to make sure it doesn't have any movement. Okay, so with that all done, the top and the 2 sides in on the outside, I have to address the inside of the closet as well. I won't go into all the same details. It's very similar process, but the one thing that's different here is when I did this top piece, I cut it on this side and I just let it run long and I marked it. For the inside though, I won't be able to do that because the closet it's narrower than the length of that piece starts with. So what I'll do is I'll measure from that side to this side and I'll get a rough cut. I'll cut it to the exact opening size. And then what I'll do is I'll just cut one side off. That way it will fit in the closet, and then I'll do the same process. Okay, so the inside is complete as well. It actually worked out really nicely. I was concerned that this side might not be as nice, but it turned out really well. One thing I'd like to point out is right here, you can see just the slightest little lip there. Now, occasionally when you're doing this trim, you might find out that this top piece might want to tip in a bit depending on the way the drywall was done and the framing. So sometimes what I'll do is to avoid it from pushing in and then having that little lip there, sometimes it can get really bad. What I'll do is I'll take a shim and I'll put it down in here just to keep this out flush with this one, right? And then I'll put a few nails in here, not through the shim I've placed, but just a few nails to keep, that'll lock that in, and then you can pull that shim back out and it'll keep it right at that level. And then when you put your DAP or filler in there, it'll hide the gap you would have. I don't have that gap, but that's just a tip. All right, so all my trim's in now, and what I want to do is I want to get it ready to paint. So the 2 things I like to use are, I use Drydex spackling. It goes on pink, it's like a pink color, and then it dries white, so it's like a dryness indicator. It lets you know when you're ready to sand it or paint it. So what I like to do is, you can either take it on your finger, you can take it with a little blade like this. Okay, and the holes on this flat side here, I'll just push them in, really push it in, and then I scrape off the excess. Okay, it fills in all those holes like that. Okay, so that takes care of these ones on the side, but you have the ones on the trim here. Now, depending on where your nail is, it might be in a little crease or something like that. So you can just take this stuff on your finger if you need to, if it's being a tricky hole to fill, and you can just fill it in like that. This stuff's water soluble, it works out pretty easily. And what I like to do is just take my finger and I can rub it up and down gently, and it actually works like sanding. It kind of sands out almost like sandpaper to it, and it just will make that disappear pretty easily. You can do that on some of these holes that aren't on a flat surface and you're having a little bit of trouble with. Yeah, you can just do that. Just use your thumb or a different finger that's clean and just very lightly, just palm of your hand, just make it fade away. And if you have to come back later, you can always add more, but if you goop it up there and get it filled in into these little creases, it'll be a nightmare to get out later. So try to get it out now. If I did find that I had like a chunk sitting in there like that and I couldn't get it out, I could use the edge of the blade here and just gently wipe it out there. Okay, get that cleaned out. You always do that. And then I like to keep a piece of paper towel handy, just so I can wipe my hands off, and maybe a bucket just to throw all the scrap paper towel in so you don't end up with it on your floor. This stuff's pretty cheap. I buy the bigger container, just that way I don't have to worry about it running out or not, or anything like that. So it gets it nice and smooth, fills the holes, and that gets it ready for paint. Depending on how your mitre turned out up here, okay, mine actually is a little bigger than I usually would like it, but I'll take the spackle again and I'll just fill it in there. If it was much bigger than that, I might switch to a wood filler because it dries harder. In this case, I'll stick with this. The wood filler, I have used it before, and it dries so hard that I find it's actually really difficult to sand down later. So I try to stay away from it, because you'll find that by the time you start sanding it down to try to remove the excess, you might actually sand some of the trim detail off. It's very hard to sand, so it can be good for filling that gap just to get it filled in for you. So for this, the creases actually, as I'm going, I can actually get those in with the flat blade of this knife. So what I'll do is I'll just try to get them with my finger. Okay, push that in there. I use the edge of the blade to just push it right into that crease. Okay, all the way up into the top here. On this top corner, what I like to do with these top corners, right at the very top corner here, I like to actually just take the edge of my blade and just run it right along here, just to bend the fibers in, and that'll close up any of those gaps. So actually it bends the two sets of trim fibers together and it hides that. But I like to try to get a little bit of the spackle in there first before I close that out. I like to do that on my trim up here too, on the crown wall. That's usually what I do. So once I've got all that filled in, I want to take the sharp end of the blade and I want to scrape out any excess, especially out of those little gaps that you have, or the little details in the trim. You want to scrape that off. So I like to, I have a piece of paper towel, just setting, it's just down on the ground. So I'm scraping it off, and then I just go down to that piece of paper towel on the ground, and I remove the excess onto there so it doesn't fall on the ground. Scrape all that off, do it the best you can. You can come back later and sand it out. Okay. Okay, so that's the most of it. So now what I do is I just take my fingers and just lightly rub it, and that'll smooth it out and hide any imperfections there. It'll make it look like a perfect mitre. You won't even know that I had a bit of a gap there to begin with, but right here I can just see that a little bit to remove. Okay, that looks pretty good. All right. All right, now that I have all these filled in, I like to go around and just double check it with, this is drywall sandpaper, it's foam back, so it's actually pretty nice because you can get in these gaps and it takes the contour of the trim without digging out too much of the filler that you put in. I like to go along just Just double check it, make sure there's no excess or buildup that you left behind. Check in the corners and stuff. Okay. Now that I'm pretty confident that's smooth and I've sanded it down to perfection, I go back through with some silicone now. I used to use this one all the time. This is a bathtub and kitchen one. This one's $3 or $4 a tube, where this one I found is a dollar or so less. And I get about the same results using it with this MDF trim and stuff. So I've switched to this one recently, but either will do the job. So what I like to do is I just take it and I cut off the tip just slightly, okay? And I want to fill in this crack down here. Now this one's actually sitting really nice and tight, but occasionally you're going to find that you end up with a little gap there, or it might shrink or move or whatever with the difference in humidity between the wood and the different products in your house. So I like to take this. Now sometimes you can buy this also in bigger tubes and use a caulking gun, but what'll happen is on the last pull of the trigger on the caulking gun, the silicone will just want to keep oozing out of the end of the gun. So you'll have more mess on your hands that way. So I like to buy these and just do it this way because you have more control over how much comes at the end. So this is water soluble. You want to make sure you use the water soluble one because it's easier for cleanup. What I like to do is just squeeze it in there, just a little tiny amount. This one has a little bit of dry silicone in it, which is going to be a problem, but then I just go down with my finger like that, and I squeeze out all the excess. And then I just take paper towel. I keep paper towel handy and just wipe it off my hand. Sometimes it's nice to have a little bucket of water close by you can rinse your hand off with. Okay, so check that again. Go down with my finger, and I have a little excess on my finger there, so I can just, I have a little gap at the top here. I can just use that just to fill that in. Okay, any little microscopic holes or anything that need to be filled in, I can go back down. So I'll go down the sides of this. Now you can, I like to, usually on the top of the door, I usually like to go just along the top, perhaps an inch or so, just so you don't see that gap on the top if you have one. In this case though, my staircase is right there. So I'll be coming down my stairs, and if anyone looks this way, they'll see the gap across the top. So for this instance, I will go across the whole top of this door casing and cover that gap up. Okay, so right here I can show you just right in there how the corner is just filled in with the caulking, and it just hides that black gap that you would see. This one was pretty tight. The paint might have covered it, but I like to do it anyways, just so you never see a gap there, and that seals that right up, and it looks a lot better in the final project. So the one other thing is, right into this corner here, I'll end up putting 2 coats of finish semi-gloss white paint on here to paint the trim, and that'll bring it into here. And once I'm 100% done, and done all my crown molding as well, because you can see up there I've gone along and put silicone into those gaps as well, I'll go along back through with this gray color that I've painted the walls, and I'll touch up right tight to the edge with a cut-in brush on there, on this trim, and then on all the baseboard once I'm done. And with that all done and all the silicone put around the corner there, the next step in this process would be get a few final coats of paint on here, and in the next video I'll install the actual door frame, the sliding door that goes in here. See you in the next video.